Let's talk about running backs you should start or sit in week 14 of the fantasy season. It is a crucial week for a lot of us to get into the playoffs. Unfortunately, four important fantasy teams are on bye: the Panthers, Patriots, Giants, and 49ers. So the Hubbard Dowdle combo not available. The Henderson Stevenson combo not available. Those Giants running backs not available, and Christian McCaffrey. There are plenty of you guys out there watching this that need to win this week, and you won't have CMC. Well, don't worry. In today's video, I'm going to go through every single matchup. There are time codes if you want to jump to a specific one, and I will rank every single running back so you'll know exactly how I would set your lineups. Let's start off with Thursday Night Football. We got them Cowboys at the Detroit Lions. This should be a very good game. Vegas thinks so because they have a 53.5 point over under, which is the highest I've seen, I think, in the past 5 to 6 weeks, to be honest with you. So Vegas anticipates a lot of fantasy points in this game. It makes sense. Cowboys, Lions, two great offenses. Let's start off with the Lions side of the ball. It's a good matchup technically against the Cowboys. When you look at fantasy schedule adjusted points allowed, the Cowboys are the sixth best matchup for your running backs. However, I will say the Cowboys defense, specifically as a rushing defense, has drastically improved since they made the Quinnen Williams trade from the New York Jets. They're much easier to pass against than they are to run against at this point. But Jahmyr Gibbs is my RB1 no matter what. High over under, elite superstar talent. Funnily enough, last week we finally admitted to you guys, hey, I don't think you can start David Montgomery even if you're in a tough position. And then on Thanksgiving Day, he comes out here and he outscores Jahmyr Gibbs with almost 13 points. Jahmyr Gibbs at 11.6. Of course, we've said this many times, but anytime David Montgomery has a rushing touchdown, he has a fine fantasy day. It's just those are few and far between this year compared to previous years. So look, we're going to start Jahmyr Gibbs with the utmost confidence. With David Montgomery, he is able to spot start my RB26. That makes him a high-end RB3 flex play. But I will say, the only reason he's this high is because there's so many running backs that I would have ranked ahead of him that are on bye and that are not available. So I would say 70% of you guys have a better option. He really is touchdown or bust at this point. Now, with Javonte Williams, I will grant you that it is a difficult matchup. There's no doubt about that, right? The Lions are actually the fourth worst matchup for your fantasy running backs. However, just last Thursday, Thanksgiving Day, we saw Javonte Williams against a tough rush defense, the Kansas City Chiefs. He came out there, had 17 fantasy points, obviously had the receiving touchdown, so a lot of his fantasy points came through the air. However, still saw the ball 20 times, 20 opportunities. He's a part of an elite offense. The point is, with the Dallas Cowboys offense, it really doesn't matter what defense you're facing. You might lower your expectations like we will in this matchup, but you're always going to start Javonte Williams because he's going to touch the ball so many times, because he's going to have so many opportunities in an elite offense, my RB13 of the week. Let's jump to the start of the Sunday slate of games. We've got the Seahawks at the Falcons here to begin. 43.5 point over under. Now the Seahawks are heavy favorites in this game, 8.5 point favorites, and it's in Atlanta. That should tell you something about what Vegas anticipates in this game. Are actually the largest spread of the week, by the way, in favor of Seattle. Now, Ken Walker is going to remain in that spot start category for me, like he has been in the last couple of weeks. They have said that they want to get him more and more involved, that he's earned more touches, and technically that has been the case, right? It's back-to-back weeks where he has led the team in snaps and overall opportunities. He had 16. However, Zach Charbonnet is not just going away, right? He had 14 total carries. On the day, Charbonnet ends up with more fantasy points because he got into the end zone, but you're starting to see Ken Walker, he's getting more and more work in the air as a receiving threat, so I do believe he is the safest player to go out there and put into your fantasy lineups. It is a good matchup against the Falcons. The Falcons are top 5 matchup for your fantasy running back this year when you adjust for schedule, so I do think Ken Walker is a fine play as a flex, as a low-end RB2. Charbonnet is definitely more risky because, just like David Montgomery, he's very much boom-bust with a touchdown. With the Atlanta Falcons, of course, you're going to start Bijan Robinson. I personally couldn't really wrap my head around people saying, well, without Michael Penix, this is really going to hurt Bijan Robinson. It's like, come on. I mean, Bijan is Bijan. They're going to target him. He's going to get his opportunities on the ground. He's a freak athlete, superstar in this league, and he showed that last week with the 30 burger. So, of course, you're going to put him into your lineups. And honestly, Tyler Algier, throw him in that Zach Charbonnet, David Montgomery conversation. If he gets a touchdown, great. If he doesn't, then he absolutely busts for your fantasy team. This matchup against the Seahawks, not one I would chase for Tyler Algier. I would say over 90% of you guys have a better option in your lineups this week. Third game we're going to look at here is the Steelers at the Rams. This is about as important as a game gets this week. This is very important for the division, right? The Steelers and the Ravens are both in that divisional battle. One of them is going to have a heavy favorite, chance, I guess, after this game finishes. 44.5 point over under. Ravens are favored by almost a touchdown. It is in Baltimore. These are two defenses that have gotten much better against the run in the second half of the year compared to the first half of the year. I mean, you look at the Ravens, you look at the Steelers, and you think, man, those are good matchups for my running back, right? No, in recent weeks, in the last 4, 5, 6 weeks of a sample size, these defenses have been much more difficult to go up against. Here's what I will say. Derrick Henry is an auto start with Lamar Jackson back. Lamar has not looked like himself, but Derrick Henry has truly looked like himself. A vintage Derrick Henry performance in the last 2 weeks, back-to-back games, over 20 fantasy points. You're going to put him into your lineup as my RB10 with some confidence. Now, I will say the Steelers running back room, it's a little bit more tricky to navigate from 1 week to the next, right? A week ago, we weren't sure if Kenneth Gainwell was starting to take this role or if, they were going to be a complete split backfield. I will say Kenneth Gainwell still has his role, right? If you look at snaps, Gainwell last week, 18-24 in favor of Jaylen Warren, but Jaylen Warren was the bigger threat on the ground, doubling the total carries of a Kenneth Gainwell, 10-5. 13 opportunities, though. That is a little bit scary to look at if you're a Jaylen Warren owner. You really want your running backs to get that 15-plus touch mark, but Jaylen Warren comes out here. He scores the rushing touchdown, 12.4 fantasy points. Look, the reality is either one of these guys could outscore the other, but with Jaylen Warren getting the RB1 looks right now as a rushing threat, those are more reliable, especially when you get into the red zone. Not an ideal matchup for either of these guys, but Jaylen Warren would be the name that I would claim as the must start in this game. Although Kenneth Gainwell, if you need a Hail Mary, there are worse Hail Marys out there to throw. Okay, let's go to the Titans at the Browns. So in the first 4 matchups we've covered, we had the highest over-under, which was a Thursday night game. Now the lowest over-under, 33.5 points with the Titans and the Browns. I mean, I am very confident because I do this every week. I don't think we've seen a lower over-under on the entire year. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but 33.5 points. The Browns are favored by 3.5 points. This is a game where you're probably excited if you have either defense for fantasy. Like the Browns defense is probably going to have a great game, but you're not necessarily that excited about starting any of these running backs outside of Quinshon Judkins. Judkins continues to be the workhorse in this offense with the Cleveland Browns. We will see Shedeur Sanders again. The good news for Judkins is that when Dylan Sampson went down with that injury last game, you finally saw him get more work in the air as a receiving threat. He had 3 targets. That gave him 26 total opportunities. Now, to turn 26 opportunities into 14 fantasy points, not ideal, but he didn't get into the end zone, so at least you're seeing a safe floor. Titans are a top 5 matchup for your running backs. Judkins, you can start. The rest of these names, just throw them out with the bathwater. I just do not care. I don't want to start Tajay Spears or Tony Pollard. I don't want to start Dylan Sampson or Jerome Ford. Sampson's probably not going to play at this point based off what we know. But Tajay and Tony, one of them could have a touchdown. If neither of them have a touchdown, that's basically the Seattle Seahawks backfield split, but in the worst offense in the NFL, or at least top 5 worst offense in the NFL. Let's jump to the Colts at the Jags. 47.5 point over under. Very close spread. Another game that is so important for division status. The Colts, the Jags, whoever wins this game will be big favorites to win the entire division. Now, Jonathan Taylor, he has had a couple down games. Obviously, we're not expecting Jonathan Taylor to give us 12 to 15 points. We're expecting him to give us 25 to 45 points. That's what we expect. He's had a rough schedule. However, this offense is still looking pretty decent in recent games. JT is my RB3. Of course, you're going to start him. You're not going to set him in any format. Now, with the Jags, what's difficult with the Jags is you're starting to see games where they just don't need to run. They don't need to throw the ball. They're already up and dominating in the vast majority of these games, which means Travis Etienne doesn't get his full allotment of work. And that's what you saw on Sunday against the Tennessee Titans. Travis Etienne with 13 touches. You had 9 touches for Bashul Tutin. So it's a little bit frustrating that the Jags are constantly in the last 3 or 4 weeks in these games where they're dominating them. But I think this should be a much more competitive game. Colts are middle of the pack against running backs. I do think Etienne has a great day here on Sunday. Bashul Tutin, much more of a Hail Mary play. Yes, he is annoyingly a goal line threat right now, but I don't think he has enough touches to really reliably start him. Put the must start tag on him. Okay, let's jump to the Commanders at the Vikings. 41.5 over under. Let's start off with the Washington Commanders. What you need to know is there's a chance, not guaranteed, but there's a chance that Jaden Daniels is back this week. If he's back this week, obviously your entire confidence in this offense will rise to a new level because he is a transcendent talent. However, they face the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings are not a good matchup for your fantasy running backs. They are a bottom 8 matchup in the league today. But at least there's a lot more clarity with this backfield. And the clarity is Chris Rodriguez is their guy, specifically their first and second down rushing threat, their goal line rushing threat. You look at opportunities. Last Sunday night, a competitive game against the Denver Broncos, Chris Rodriguez led the way with 12 total opportunities. JCM is an afterthought at this point. 4 touches for JCM. All right, he is not a player that we need to even worry about. This is Chris Rodriguez's backfield. He averaged about 4 yards per carry, got into the end zone against the Denver Broncos, and he's very clearly the guy in Washington, so you don't need to worry about some sort of split. Now, obviously, if they're down, Jeremy McNichols will get plenty of opportunities because he is the best pass-catching threat. But I put Rodriguez as an RB25. Consider him the way you consider a David Montgomery, a Zach Charbonnet. That is the type of player you're looking at this week. Now, with the Vikings, I'm currently ranking these 2 names as if Aaron Jones is going to miss this week with that shoulder injury. He's had that shoulder injury. He's been dealing with it throughout the year. Now, the team has labeled Aaron Jones day-to-day with the shoulder injury, so I'm not 100% sure if he's going to be out there or not. Let's play out both scenarios. First thing you need to know is it's a great matchup for your running backs against the Washington Commanders, right? The Commanders right now are the 8th best matchup for your running back, and they have just gotten worse as a defense. To be fair, in the last couple of weeks, they've been more competitive, but specifically as a rushing defense, they're pretty easy to win against. So Jordan Mason will be my RB23. I would have high expectations for him in the sense of like a 10-plus point game. If there is no Aaron Jones, I think he'll get plenty of work. However, if Aaron Jones is active, I'll put Aaron Jones into that spot start category, and Jordan Mason would no longer be someone that you would consider with any serious intent, right? Now, as far as JJ McCarthy goes, KOC says he's probably going to start for them this Sunday. He has cleared concussion protocol. And I guess if you're a Vikings fan out there, a lot of people were like, could it get worse than JJ McCarthy? And the answer was yes. Max Brosmer, it could have gotten worse. So maybe you will see an improved offense, as crazy as that sounds. So last week we had a Thanksgiving BOGO offer for our start, sit, and trade question vouchers on the Flock site if you needed help or advice. You guys loved it so much. A lot of you are requesting we do it again this week, so I'm going to honor it. For the next 24 hours, there is another BOGO offer on the Flock site. If you want to help from Fantasyland for start, sit, or trade question vouchers, you can check that out in the pinned comment if you want to submit and get some help. Let's jump to the Dolphins at the Jets. 41.5 point over under. I view this matchup as a very easy matchup to decipher, right? There's 2 names. You're starting these 2 names, and you're not making it more complicated than it needs to be. That is Devon Achane. That is Breece Hall. Devon Achane been one of the best running backs in fantasy football this entire year. He is the wide receiver 1, the RB1, a threat in the red zone through the air, on the ground. You're going to play him in your lineups, right? Breece Hall, however, I just want to talk about him for a second because their trust in Breece Hall has grown over the course of the year. For example, in this last matchup, he had 21 opportunities. Only one other time a running back touched the ball. Isaiah Davis had 1 target. Not a single other time this entire game did the Jets give another running back any opportunities. He dominated opportunities, dominated snap rate, 58 out of 66 snaps. So I think he's a safe play here on out for the rest of the season. And he's got a pretty decent matchup against the Dolphins, who are middle of the pack against running backs. Dolphins are favored, but these are 2 bad teams. I can see this being a very competitive game, both running backs being needed as dual threat guys. Okay, let's jump to the Saints at the Bucks. 42.5 point over under. The Bucks are favored by 7.5 points. Hey, where are my Bucky Irving owner people at? Okay, let's just take a moment to appreciate our guy, Bucky Irving. If you know me well, you'll know I've been waiting on the return of Bucky Irving for a long time in one of my biggest leagues. And I am so thrilled to have him back into my fantasy lineups. They said they were going to slow roll him last week. Well, this is what a slow roll looked like for Bucky Irving last week. Dominated snap share, right? I think 54% of the snaps. He had 19 touches, and Rachaad White had 5. So that is their version of slow rolling him. If you have Bucky Irving, go look at his playoff schedule, okay? Watch the game and see how freaking good this kid is, and realize you might have a league winner on your hand. Now, unfortunately, in the Flock League, I'm not going to make the playoffs, but I hope you people out there had a strong enough roster to wait on Bucky and now go into the playoffs with a ton of confidence. He plays the Saints this week. My RB8, a must start. You know he's going to get 15 or more touches. The Bucs are favored by 7.5 points. That is good news for Bucky Irving, as they should have plenty of opportunities to run the ball. Rachaad White, not a player I trust. Sean Tucker has become completely irrelevant. I will say this, if you're going to roster one of them as a handcuff, I think it needs to be Sean Tucker, because he's going to get more of the work on the ground if Bucky Irving were to sustain an injury. Now with Devin Neal, Neal is a floor play, right? He's not a player that you're putting into your lineup expecting him to win you your week. You're just hoping he can give you 8 to 12 points at this point. Now, the good news is he completely dominated opportunities for the Saints in this last game. He had 17 touches. Evan Hull, the backup, had just 5. Now, those 17 touches only turned into 9.9 fantasy points, but he's used on the ground, in the air, so he's a fine floor play. But my RB24, purely based off of volume, the same way you'd look at like a Woody Marks at this point, right? Let's jump to the Bengals at the Bills. This is the second highest over-under of the week at 51.5 points. The Bills are favored by 5.5 points at home. That's a lot of respect for the Bengals, which makes sense because obviously Joe Burrow is back, and this offense looks like they're firing on all cylinders. Here's the great news. If you own a running back in this matchup, I have good news, okay? I'm here to bring the good news of the fantasy gospel, and that is both the Bengals and the Bills are elite matchups for your fantasy running backs. The Bengals, the best matchup for your running backs. The Bills, the third best matchup for your running backs. So if you have James Cook and you have Chase Brown, either one of these names, and you really need to win this week, they could be your X factor. Both of them are locked and loaded must starts. I could see a Ray Davis or a Ty Johnson end up having a decent day as well on the ground because the Bengals are so easy to run against, but I'm not confident enough. I don't have the cojones to put them into my lineup. With Chase Brown, my guy that I've been, the comments have been a little harsh about Chase Brown being a my guy this year, but you're starting to see it really pay off in the second half of the year. He is turning into a league winner, and even though Samaje Perine is back, he's still getting plenty of opportunities. Okay, let's jump to the afternoon slate of games. We've got the Broncos and the Raiders. 40.5 point over under. That is tied for the second lowest over under of the week. I want you guys to think about this for a second. Remember earlier we talked about the Titans Browns, how they had the lowest over under of the week? That was 33.5 points. Vegas looked at the Broncos and Raiders matchup and said, yeah, that's at least a 7-point better matchup for total points. That's how bad that matchup looks. Anyway, Broncos are favored by 7.5 points. I think they should be favored by more. It's in Las Vegas. That's probably why. But you have two clear must starts, in my opinion, here. RJ Harvey and Ashton Jeanty. Harvey was on our Dominate video last week. The efficiency was not there against the Commanders. Honestly, the Commanders defense played much better than I thought they were going to. But the touchdowns were there. The opportunities were there. He had 2 touchdowns, just 35 rushing yards. You want to see that efficiency bump up. But he had 13 attempts, 4 targets. If you get 17 touches every week in this Denver Broncos offense, all the goal line work, then that is a player that you can start every single week with the Denver Broncos. Now he faces the Raiders, a top 7 matchup for your running backs. Harvey is a fantastic play this week. As far as Ashton Jeanty goes, yeah, I mean, this is just the story of the Raiders. They're a bad team. They're a bad offensive line. He's not going to be efficient, but he is going to be involved on the ground and in the air. So a guy who's had 8 targets, in 2 of his last 3 games, you can put that guy into your lineup and have expectations of a safe 12-point floor. Let's jump to the Bears at the Packers next. Now, the Bears backfield, if you weren't paying attention this last week, 2 weeks ago even, there's been some changes to this backfield, okay? So 2 weeks ago was the first week that we saw Kyle Monangai really lead the way from a snap, rushing share, all those opportunity percentages, right? It was Kyle Monangai's backfield. Now, this last week, you kind of saw more of a split, but they just ran the ball down the Eagles' throat, man. So Kyle Monangai had 23 touches. Then you had DeAndre Swift with 20 touches. We've seen multiple weeks now where Kyle Monangai has led the team in touches, has been uber efficient on the ground, has gotten the touchdowns, gotten the goal line opportunities. Obviously, in this game, the Eagles were really not that competitive, or at least as competitive as you wanted them to be. But I would trust Kyle Monangai. I think he is the player I would prefer to start if you're going to start one of these names. But DeAndre Swift is a fine, flexible, spot start as well. It's just if I had to choose one of them, it would be Monangai, because we have multiple weeks of him being the guy on the ground for this offense. Now, Josh Jacobs, of course, going to be a must start. Bears are a top 10 matchup for your running backs. Let's just hope he can stay healthy as he hopefully leads us into the playoffs into week 15. Okay, let's jump to the Rams at the Cardinals. 48.5-point over under, third highest of the week. We should see plenty of fantasy points in this matchup here. The Rams, however, are favored by 7.5 points, so Vegas does anticipate them having a pretty big game. With Kyren Williams, we did have a little bit of a scare on Sunday with his ankle injury. However, we already heard from Sean McVay. He said nothing that we expect to restrict these guys from being available this week, when he was referring to Kyren Williams and Devontae Adams. He then went on to say, we might limit some guys in practice once we see how they come in Tuesday, but nothing that we expect to affect game statuses for Arizona. So expect Kyren Williams out there. I'm sorry if you own Blake Corum. It doesn't look like Blake Corum is going to take over that RB1 role anytime soon, unless Kyren goes down with a very serious injury. So we're going to start Kyren Williams in this matchup with a lot of confidence. Blake Corum's a fine Hail Mary play. I would say the same thing about Bam Knight, assuming there is no Trey Benson this week. Bam Knight has just been effective, man. I mean, he's had quite a few touchdowns since Trey Benson went down with that injury. He's had a touchdown in about 70 or more % of the games that he's played. So if you're going to start one of these Cardinal running backs, Bam Knight has been the most consistent, but it could be any one of these guys. It's a little bit of a Russian roulette. I don't expect Trey Benson to play. Last week, we did hear that there was a setback with his injury designation. He was a DNP on Thursday and Friday. But of course, if he's active, that would tell me he's going to be the alpha for this team. So he would be the one to spot start, and you wouldn't play around with the other names in this backfield. Okay, let's jump to Sunday Night Football. We've got a very good one on deck. The Texans at the Chiefs. 42.5-point over under. Both of these teams need to win, really, if they're thinking about the playoffs. For the Chiefs, it's a wild card, right? They're 6-6. Texans are 7-5. I don't think the Texans have a legit shot at the division, so for most of them, it's probably wild card. Anything's possible, of course. Chiefs are favored by 3.5 points. Makes sense to me. They're at home in Kansas City, and their backs are against the wall. Now, here's the unfortunate part, rather, with the Kansas City Chiefs. This backfield, I just think, is going to get more and more confusing. Do you guys remember last week when Ramondre Stevenson came back from his injury for the first week, and you thought, oh, wow, well, maybe it is Travion Henderson backfield alone. Then on Monday Night Football, you saw Travion Henderson get more and more involved in the offense. I think that is what I'm projecting for the Chiefs running backs in week number 15. Yes, it did look like Kareem Hunt was the clear guy in week 13. This last week, Kareem Hunt had 42 snaps, just 20 for Pacheco. Kareem Hunt had 16 opportunities, just 5 for Pacheco. But I do anticipate Pacheco becoming more and more involved over the course of the next couple weeks. It's not a good matchup against the Texans, not a matchup you want to chase for your running backs. And I don't think it's going to be very clear which of these guys will get more opportunities moving forward. So I would say let's avoid this backfield if you can, please. Now with Woody Marks, it's a similar situation in the sense of not a good matchup against the Chiefs. I think we can all recognize that, right? This is not a matchup that you really want to go out there and target. However, what you know for Woody Marks is he is going to get the vast majority of the opportunities with Houston. This last week, he didn't get the end zone, the touchdown, unfortunately. That went to Nick Chubb. That's always frustrating to see, right? He had 34 yards and a touchdown. However, he did walk away with 20 opportunities. And this is now 3 or 4 weeks in a row where Woody Marks is just dominating snaps, dominating opportunities. He's not behind a good offensive line, okay? He's not behind an effective short yardage offense, okay? That's just a reality with Woody Marks. That's why you'll see him labeled as a risky start. I don't like the matchup. He'll get plenty of opportunities. You're looking at a 7-point floor with a 13-point ceiling, okay? That's what you're expecting with him. Well, we were on a heater in DFS in the recent weeks, but this last week I finished 62nd in the Super Slam contest. Not good enough. I got to go back to the chalkboard. I got to choose 6 non-quarterbacks, set my lineup. That's what you got to do too if you want to join me and play up against me in this FastDraft contest. Download the app, use a promo code LAND. I'll match your deposit up to $50. Again, download FastDraft, use code LAND. You can check that out in the pinned comment if you want to have some fun against me this week. Okay, last game of the week, Monday Night Football, and it's the Eagles at the Chargers. This game is tied for the second lowest over-under of the week. The spread is 3.5 points in favor of the Eagles. Obviously, these numbers in Vegas are going to change depending on what happens with Justin Herbert. All right, he underwent a hand surgery, for his non-throwing hand, where he stabilized the fracture he had. He's considered day to day. He himself already came out and said he's operating as if he's playing in this game. But of course, we're going to have to monitor things as the week goes on. Marion Hampton came back to practice last week, didn't end up playing. I do think he has a better chance to play this week. He's a spot start for me, my RB19. He's like on that very final edge of a must start versus a spot start. Eagles and Chargers are middle of the pack against running backs, so it's not a matchup that you need to really target or avoid. I wouldn't start Kamani Vidal if Amarian Hampton is out there, but if Amarian Hampton is inactive, then I do think Vidal would be a must start, just simply because you know he's going to get all the opportunities, and he's on a much better offense than, let's say, a Woody Marks, for example, when you're comparing touches versus effective offense that you're a part of. With Saquon Barkley, I mean, look, there's no way around it. It's been a huge regression this year, all right? The people who were screaming regression were right, okay? They just simply were. He has not been the same player. The offense has not been the same offense. They've not been as effective on the ground. But still, you know how talented he is. I don't see a scenario where you can sit him unless you're in an 8-team league and you just have incredible options. My RB12, still a top 12 play for me in this matchup against the Chargers, especially if Herbert's out. I think he's got to be in there, but we'll have to monitor that throughout the week. I appreciate you guys watching the video. Do me a favor, hit the like button to show some love. Subscribe if you found any value in today's video. And I'll let you guys know that just in a couple hours, the wide receiver version of this video will be available on the channel. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss that and turn those notifications on. Enjoy the rest of your day. Let's get these final playoff pushes in. Let's go get into the playoffs. Draft with me every night this week on the FastDraft app, where there are thousands of dollars to be won weekly. Getting started is easy. Download the FastDraft app, use the promo code LAND at signup to get your deposit match up to $50. That's up to 10 free entries on us. And when you finish your first DFS contest, I'll send you my weekly rankings completely free. Check out the link in the pinned comment to start drafting today.